Welcome into a new edition of BWI Live. That's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickle from Blue White Illustrated. It's mid-June, which means Elite 11 finals are underway in California. Penn State yet again has a commitment on hand, this time in the class of 2026, of course. We're going to talk about that, get into some buy or sell topics, and also talk about a new Nittany Lion who has been on campus for about a month now and is getting rave reviews already from his position coach. So we'll get into that in just a little bit. But T. Frank, it's June 18th. It's a busy week on the recruiting front, the last one before the 2-month dead period kicks off. That begins on Monday, June 23rd. Penn State has a camp today. We're going to talk about that as well, and this weekend too. There's plenty of recruiting and camp action as well. So one final push down the recruiting homestretch here before things slow down a little bit, at least on the in-person visit front.
Yeah, and then on Saturday, I got to go back home because my niece has a graduation party on Saturday. So it's going to be a busy couple of days here for your old buddy T. Frank. But of course, nice to have the things to talk about, and we're going to get into all those topics that Greg talked about today. What's been on your mind lately when it comes to football? Because as you mentioned, from the recruiting side of things, it's a big time of year, but on the football side of things, pretty quiet. We're all kind of still nibbling on the crumbs left of what we talked about with the coaching staff roughly 10 to about 2 weeks ago at this point. Right. So I guess what have you been thinking about? What's been on your mind with kind of the team proper?
Yes. Well, first, congratulations to your niece on the graduation. Hope you guys have an enjoyable party and you get some downtime this weekend. In terms of the football side of things, it's just the ramping up of it's slow ramp up of the preseason coverage. We're at a time now where most Junes, it's all recruiting, and then there's nothing else. But we are now 2 weeks or so away from the start of the new era of college athletics, when the House settlement and all of the ramifications that come with it go into effect on July 1st. So keeping an eye on that and what it means for Penn State and what it means for schools across the country, obviously. There's a lot of things that are about to change and be different, and some of them will be evident immediately, and some of them will not. So that's been a big focus of mine over the last couple of weeks and as we move forward here. But to your point, a lot of it is recruiting-based at this moment in time. A lot of it is waiting to see how Penn State does with its top targets, its final visitors here of the week and of the preseason, so to speak, because they won't have anyone in town after this until Nevada week. So checking in on that, and kind of curious, there's been a lot of movement on the commitment front across the country in June, more so than I remember in June's past. So I'm curious what that may do, if anything, to that usual first 5-day to 10-day stretch of July, where it was just a commitment almost every hour, if not every half hour. Curious if that is as busy as it was previously. So just thinking about that, and to the point Brad makes in the comment section, a lot of thinking about what Penn State expectations should be this year and how you can best frame them to not overhype a team that some believe is the number one team in the preseason in the country, while also realizing what it was able to do from a roster retention standpoint, from a coaching staff upgrade standpoint, and from a transfer portal upgrade standpoint, and put it into the perspective of what fans think can happen and should be expecting to happen. So, Brad, I mean, I don't remember the anticipation of the 94 season, to be completely honest with you.
Yeah.
But since I've been
2017 in kind of a similar vein, feels like that might have been.
Yeah. I think so, because there was so much anticipation coming off of not just the Big Ten championship win, but that incredible Rose Bowl that neither team should have had to lose. Obviously, one of them did, and it was Penn State. But 17 comes to mind. And I just think you look back at, and that was obviously the last time Penn State was even in the realm of the preseason polls that it is now. And even that is not totally comparable because, again, some have Penn State at number one in their preseason rankings. I think when the first AP poll comes out in August, they'll be somewhere between 2 and 5. I don't think they'll be number one there, but we'll see. You never know. There's a lot that can change over the next month, basically 2 months till that poll comes out. But looking for any football news we can find, T. Frank, at a time of year when if it's not recruiting, there's not much of it.
Yeah, not to give away the secret, but this is the creative services portion of the schedule where we're trying to come up with interesting, and I like to call it informed speculation. Just talking about the team, talking about stuff. But especially these Wednesday shows where we're not talking about recruiting specifically because we got a recruiting segment on the Tuesday show and a whole recruiting Thursday show. We are we're working overtime on the creative services department here, but I do think that not to downplay what we got today. I think we got some good discussion topics for buy or sell coming up later for sure.
Yes. Well, keep us in mind as you get to that second half of your mow or whatever it may be. You're hopefully getting to do outside as this week's weather finally gets a little better. Yes. Yeah, I'm probably
in your area. We're supposed to have thunderstorms here today. So
yeah, they're saying that down here too, but I'm gonna just ignore those at this point. The sun was out for 5 minutes earlier, and it was the best 5 minutes of the day until this started. So
yeah,
we'll see if we get any more.
The answer is extreme denial. No.
Yes.
Yeah, it's supposed to rain today. No, it isn't.
Yes, exactly.
It's currently raining on you while you're mowing. No,
right.
It's not.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to go with. Well, if you do want the latest recruiting news and intel, you can go over to bluewhiteillustrated.com where it's $1 for 1 week of access and then build annually from there. There's a lot going on in the prediction space of the recruiting world right now, a lot going on in the official visit space of the recruiting world right now. The guys will talk about some of that on tomorrow's show on Thursday morning. But for now, let's go over to bluewhiteillustrated.com where it's just $1 for the first week, build annually. One of the things, T. Frank, being discussed over on the Blue White Illustrated message boards and with our On3 teammates who are out in Los Angeles is the Elite 11 finals, where Troy Huhn, Penn State's 4-star quarterback commit, one of 2 commits in the class of 2026, is on hand competing for a spot in that final 11. And this is not unfamiliar territory for a Penn State commit. They have not, 6 of the last 7, I believe, they've had a commit there at the Elite 11 finals.
I know it's 4 of the last 5. I may have had that. I may have typed that incorrectly in the article because it. Ryan was saying something about where they had guys previously. I know Sean Clifford was there in like 2019, or however long ago that was. It's I looked it up this morning. I don't have all the exact dates and times. I'm not the guy for all the facts. That's what Greg's here for. But yeah, I would think the current run is the most impressive that Penn State has been on, going back to Drew Allar in 2021. So yeah, I think it's a great sign for Penn State football and the health of that particular spot on the roster.
Right. So if you're not familiar with Elite 11, it gathers the top quarterbacks in the country who earn their way to the finals in Los Angeles via the regional feeder programs or events, of which there are 8 across the country. State College has hosted one the last couple of years. That's where Troy Huhn earned his invite following that event, not at it directly, but later in the process once they evaluate the tape and made their addition. So day 1 was put in the books on Tuesday. Troy Huhn was number 10 in Rivals' first day rankings. He did not make On3's top 11, but that's not something. I think that's the biggest thing I wanted to talk about, T. Frank, is that there's always this. It's every year, these 3 days, every year. It's always the night of when the live updates are rolling, and then the morning of when everyone wakes up and reads the top rankings that were posted at like 2 a.m. on the East Coast because of the time difference. Yeah. And everyone freaks out if their quarterback is not in the top 11, or even if they are not higher in the top 11. And I don't necessarily think that's the right way to look at this event. Yeah, of course, I realize that fans want their guy to be at the top, and there's something to be said about a prospect's future based on where he is at the top of this event. There's no doubt. There's history to prove it, but it's not an end-all be-all.
Yeah, and I do think getting to that final 11 is important. If you just look historically at what they've been able to do in terms of selecting and finding really good quarterback talent. But being I guess the thing, the threshold I was thinking of was the MVP versus being among the Elite 11. And I just want to throw up a couple of years here on the screen for you to see. And, for those listening on the podcast side, I'll read out some of the names that are here. So let's go to 2018. Jaden Daniels didn't win MVP. Spencer Rattler won MVP that year, went to Oklahoma and then South Carolina. Ryan Helinski was a good quarterback for Northwestern, decent quarterback. I'm just naming guys that Max Duggan made a college football playoff. Sam Howell's in the NFL. Graham Mertz was good for about 6 games. Bo Nix, a first-round draft pick. You go to some of these other years where there's I think 2017 was the year where you have Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence, Matt Corral made the NFL. Tyler Shuck was just drafted. Was he a first-round draft pick or a second-round draft pick? That story is just wild in general. Dorian Thompson-Robinson's in the NFL. So if you're among the Elite 11 finalists, you're here and you're in this particular group, it's a strong signal that you are, destined for a certain level of success on a high probability. And I think there's a lot of, as you mentioned, wanting your quarterback to be the guy. And sure, you have certain situations where the MVP is Justin Fields or the MVP is somebody else who is goes on to be a top draft pick or a first round draft pick. Being in that group, I think, is the most important thing. So in Troy Huhn, his situation, his circumstances of not being a guy who's been playing the position his entire life, I think is just interesting that he's developed to the point that he's here already. And now we have this kind of conversation, this information to back that up of being on the cusp of being one of these guys. I think it's a good sign for Penn State's positional health long term. And then I think if you reflect backwards and look at the roster they have right now, we're going to get in this a little bit later in the quarterback 2 competition, but I think it's really important that they've got 2 guys that were Elite 11 finalists on the roster. Like that's how you start stacking talent in a room, is you get a bunch of these guys.
Right. And I think Penn State is proven that has proven that it's capable of doing that throughout the recruiting evaluation process. And Huhn is just the latest example of that. So I guess a couple timeline things I'll point out to you. The Elite 11 will release its own rankings. Of course, they set the Elite 11, even though a lot of times people rely on On3 or 24/7 or Rivals Rank, whatever. The Elite 11 evaluators, rather, put out their own rankings each day before putting out the final Elite 11. That's usually somewhere between 11 and 1 on the East Coast. So we'll see if a little bit later today, Troy Huhn doesn't get some more love in that day 1 discussion. But either way, he has 2 more days in to showcase what he can do. I think the other thing, and T. Frank, you can probably get into this a little bit better than I could from a technical perspective, but each day is different in terms of what they're being asked to do. And I think that is often forgot too, that if you are able to compete at a high level, the highest level even, at all 3 days of skill challenges, then there's a reason you're a 5-star. There's or a high 4-star. And not every high school quarterback's not there, and they shouldn't be. If they were, then there would be no reason to have these events because everyone would just be there. And so guys can shine on different days too, and that's important to remember as well.
Yeah, and so I think a guy, I didn't realize this. I was listening to something on social media from Troy Huhn. I knew he'd only been playing quarterback for 4 years, but before that, he was an offensive lineman. So very different skill set, very different training. And maybe he was just playing football at that point and there was no training whatsoever. So a lot of these guys have been training to be quarterbacks their entire lives. And so when you watch him throw, there's just some consistency in terms of where he is in his development path of he throws the ball the right way. He's got a good release. He's got a good throwing motion. He's got all the right basics and baselines, but how long has he had to refine it and be good at it and to really have it be as natural as some of these guys have been doing a long time. And so, I think that maybe is part of what I saw from him at the Elite 11 in State College. And then I think it sounds like that's kind of what it is watching him during the Elite 11 highlights I saw earlier yesterday when people were putting them out on social media. So that's kind of the context of Troy Huhn within that. Right. Then I think by the end, they actually put him through like a full, it looks like they put him through like a full private workout. Like if you were an NFL quarterback in the draft and you had to do a private workout or a pro day, I think they do something similar to that. And then they kind of examine in stark reality, stark relief, not just the guys that are everyone's throwing, but you see one guy after another do the exact same thing. And you can kind of compare and contrast. So between just doing some passing drills versus doing some more of the complex things, it's designed to challenge you. And that was one of the things I noticed, in State College over the last couple of years. It's designed to make you get tired, fatigued, and see how your fundamentals stack up when you're in close to game-like situation, so you can make in shorts and a t-shirt.
Right. And another important reminder there, yes, this isn't shorts and a t-shirt. They're not facing pass rushers. They're not wearing pads. So another part of the evaluation process there as well. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that, T. Frank? Again, we'll have updates on the Elite 11 at bluewhiteillustrated.com throughout the rest of the week, leading up to the release of the final 11. I guess that'll be either Thursday or Friday.
Yeah, and so I guess part of the other aspect of this, that one of the comments that stood out that I heard multiple times, both at the Elite 11 and then I heard echoed yesterday, is just Troy Huhn looks like a quarterback. You know, from a build perspective, from a frame perspective, it's probably the one thing about Troy Huhn as a quarterback that really stands out. The rest of his skills are all really sound and really solid. You can see why Penn State really likes him as a quarterback. But in terms of arm strength, foot quickness, explosiveness, power, velocity, any of these things that you might say about a quarterback that are, maybe get you noticed, he doesn't pop out from the group. But if he's one of the most consistent quarterbacks there and he's continually an A- or a B+ in that sort of category, he's going to make the final 11. And so I think that's kind of how I view his trajectory as a quarterback. And then the development he can get at Penn State should accentuate some of those skills and enhance them, because there's just a lot of development room on that frame for Troy Huhn.
Right. And we'll see. Obviously, he has plenty of time to continue developing before he gets to State College. The Elite 11 is his latest chance to do so. So we'll keep track of his progress over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com and here on the YouTube and podcast feeds as well. T. Frank, let's move on. It's the Wednesday edition of the Blue White Illustrated live show. Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickle from Blue White Illustrated. It's, again, a time of year when recruiting is the main focus. But as you mentioned at the top of the show, T. Frank, we did recently hear from Penn State assistant coaches, including Dan Connor, program great Dan Connor, who is now the linebackers coach, has been the linebackers coach, but now officially has that title in print, at least publicly. Privately, it's been like that for a little bit. But one of the things we're going to discuss is his recent comments about Amari Campbell. And I know you wrote about this a little bit. I did as well over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. And T. Frank, I don't think we have the video of him talking about this, but the headline quote for me was basically Dan Connor, who is the word is not reserved, but I think he has a little bit of Jim Knowles in him, where he's not necessarily hyperbole doesn't seem to be his thing. Over exaggeration does not seem to be his thing. His words are meaningful, powerful, because he doesn't use a lot of them. And so when he mentions Amari Campbell being someone who's almost impossible to find in the transfer portal in terms of a guy with experience, production, and a willingness to be coached and get better and earn his role on his new team, I just thought that was notable, especially because he's already made that impression in just a short month or so on campus.
Yeah, so it was something that I think there were some split opinions, I think, about Amari Campbell as a prospect when you watch him on film. And the more I dug into it, the more I became impressed with Amari Campbell for certain factors and situations. So I asked Dan Connor about it back in the beginning of June and kind of set up the parameters. So maybe I was leading the witness a little bit, but I think it was important the way he framed it. Like, he not only agreed, but as you said, impossible to find was how he phrased it. Of, here's a guy who came in and played early. Not only did he play early, he played early at middle linebacker. We talk all the time, and I think the examples are pretty clear at Penn State, where they don't want to put young guys in positions where they're making calls or they have to execute a larger part of the game plan than you would be comfortable with for a guy in his second year. Amari Campbell didn't have a choice, I think partly based on talent, partly based on merit, that he was probably the best linebacker for the job to run the North Carolina defense in the ACC last year as a sophomore. I think he was. I think he had enough games played where in his freshman season that he was a sophomore. I need to double check that. But generally, like a second-year linebacker leading the defense, he starts the year with an injury and gets better continually throughout the season. So that looks like a guy that is coachable and is able to learn and able to progress in real time. Like, when the bullets are flying, there's enough mental capacity for him to still improve in these areas. And so that's why I asked Dan Connor about that, of like, that combination, how rare is that to find a guy who has starting experience? Because remember, the talk of Tamir Robinson was, he didn't have any starting experience. He had a couple hundred reps under his belt. 750, I think, is the number last year of snaps that Amari Campbell played in
that ballpark.
2024. Yep. That's a big deal. Like, that's a big deal at that position. And so he just said, like, to find the growth and upside, plus a guy who's has experience, and then the personality fit. That's very rare to find where you can get both in the transfer portal, especially in that spring window. So I think for Penn State fans who maybe wanted other linebackers that are a little bit bigger, older, physically mature, have some more of those obvious traits on film, they're banking on the development here from Amari Campbell. Now, I'll couch the point here. He's arriving in May,
Right.
trying to pick up a new defense and trying to assimilate to new teammates. That's a lot. That's a lot. So, I think that I'm not trying to overhype what he is, but also give context of why maybe Dan Connor explained it the way he did from what was there and what he saw on that particular player's profile.
Right. And the most important part of it to me is that Penn State needed another body. It's just that simple. And they needed someone who could come in and fill any kind of a role. And Amari Campbell, we'll see what he earns, obviously, in his first year at Penn State. You would think, at least to me, you're talking special teams at an absolute minimum. And in a worst case scenario, he's just a special teams guy this year. I would expect that, the more likely outcome is that he's a part of the rotation in some ways at linebacker. And then we'll see what, again, he earns in terms of earning more snaps as the season unfolds. But they needed another body there. I can't ever remember a time James Franklin was so poignantly adamant about, hey, like we remember after the blue-white game, if you're a linebacker in the portal, we want to talk to you. I can never recall him being that direct, but it was necessary. I mean, Penn State, the numbers there were not pretty. Just in general, I mean, if you don't even bother with the experience factor, things like that, the number just was not good. They just needed one more guy, and so you get one with production who seems to be someone who will fit well in the locker room. I thought it was interesting that I can't remember. I think it was James Franklin talking, not Dan Connor, but saying it was James Franklin. The number of people who supported the idea of taking Amari Campbell. Everyone from obviously internal guys like Tony Rojas, who was on social media almost immediately when Campbell said he was going in the portal and pushing for it, to external people like Mac Brown, his former head coach at North Carolina, and Jeff Collins, who has come across him obviously as a longtime college coach. So you had all these different people from different backgrounds and different ages and all that pushing for this union to make it to take place, and so it did. And we'll see what that means on the field. Doesn't mean it'll be perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Does not mean Amari Campbell's going to have 15 tackles and 2 sacks against Nevada on August 30th. But from what we have seen in the spring transfer portal window, I think it's about as good as you could ask for.
Yeah, and it's a situation where they've got enough players now that can contribute. And I know that's kind of what you just said, but like even Tamir Robinson, you felt like there was a big question mark there. I'd say you have a little bit more confidence in Amari Campbell doing it. And I'm not saying that they are glad that this happened. Obviously, James Franklin started out the last time he talked about this. He started out saying, I didn't want to lose the player we lost, meaning Tamir Robinson. Right. But trying to find the silver linings of, again, going back to here's a guy who's done it and you saw get better. Now, you also saw the warts. That's the other problem is we don't know Tamir Robinson's warts necessarily. We have an idea of some of the areas he needed to improve, but we don't know fully locked in Tamir Robinson where he's going to be good, where he's going to be bad. We do have a better idea of Amari Campbell where his strengths and weaknesses lie. So there's a little bit of a bias towards that as well. So I think that they're in a good position. We'll see how quickly they can get him up to speed.
Yes, and that'll be Dan Connor's biggest focus over the next basically 2 months until preseason camp begins, which of course we are counting down to here on the Wednesday edition, June 18th of the BWI Live Show. That's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickle. T. Frank, you look at just across the board here. I'm just scrolling the chat quick, see if there's any questions for us to kick around. But yeah, at this time of year, I think you wrote it in the intro to your story about the show over at BlueWireIllustrated.com.
You read
it's all about what's that?
You read those?
I do. Yes. I think that they're deep in the recruiting, or I'm sorry, in the off-season workouts. And so things are a little bit quieter than they normally would be this time of year. But this is when a lot of the foundation is set. I remember last year, Chuck Losey talking right around this time, basically calling this the most important 6 weeks they were going to have. Obviously, it feels like, the most important 2 months is spring practice. Then the most important 6 weeks is just kind of goes on and on. But the one thing he talked about that I'm just sort of rolling this conversation to a different place is that this time period is big for leadership. Now, Penn State has more established leadership now than it probably ever has in the James Franklin era, considering how many for new guys who can start emerging at this time of year too. And so there's maybe a lot more going on than what meets the eye, and things that will set the foundation for things that are going to happen down the road that you may not be thinking of right now. That can be tied back to this time period for the program.
So there is, I should have tweeted this out, but I was walking to one of the prospect camps recently, and I had not noticed this before. I don't know if this is new or not, but there's a hill across from the Lash building, across from Haluba Hall and the football facility that's right by the Bryce Jordan Center. It's like, the part of it right by the parking lot down where the coaches park for the Bryce Jordan Center. And just knowing from history, like that's where they do drills. Like they run that hill. They've got stairs built in now, and they've got yard lines on that hill. And it's one of those, if you know, sort of situations, right. Looking at it, what sort of torture, intentional training goes on there on that particular hill of trying to sprint uphill. So these are the grinding sort of days for a program. And I think that's part of this conversation. It's not just about like who's going to start and who's going to be the guy that makes the plays. It's also who's going to push everyone to be their physical best heading into the year of conditioning and mental conditioning and all of those things that make hard men, that make football players into who they are. It's not just about like what happens on the field. It's also the mental strength to push through adversity and all those things and all those life lessons we aspire to assign to football. Like that's where they happen. That's what we're talking about. That's what Chuck Losey's talking about. So it's not just the leadership of Drew Allar getting the quarterbacks and the receivers together. It's like, who's going to be the first up the hill and who's going to tell you you're not allowed to quit? Who's going to tell you you need to go harder on that next rep? That's what's happening. And that's how you get some of these breakthroughs. And so all of that is kind of, I'm trying not to get into like the deep, like flag waving for football. But also like, that's a part of it. That's part of the process.
Right. Well, you mentioned the prospect camp a moment ago. Penn State holding another one of those today in State College, and they're coming down the home stretch here. It's been a busy June, 4 camps, 4 7-on-7s, and now there's going to be what'd you say earlier, 4 and 3 days or something along
3 and 5 days, I want to say.
Yeah.
So today on Wednesday, then Friday, then Sunday.
Right. And so you will be checking those out for Blue White Illustrated and have observations over on the Lions Den message board along with Ryan Snyder. Just any thoughts there in terms of what you might be thinking going into that today?
Yeah, I'm just curious about who's going to be at this particular camp because it's on a Wednesday. And so like I don't know that every school is out for the summer. I think some are, and that's always one of those things that trips me up because I haven't been in high school in a very long time. But a midweek prospect camp, it's an opportunity, I think, if there are reduced numbers for guys to stand out. If you come in, you're great at this particular camp. There's fewer people to get eyeballs on. And then this Sunday is the whiteout camp. So that's another big thing for Penn State football in terms of getting some of the best prospects. And kind of the same idea. It's a smaller camp. There's more of that individual assessment and individual coaching. So I think from a prospect standpoint, this is a very important week, and there's just going to be a ton of kids that come through. So important to see who shows up, by the way, to the whiteout camp. So those are the things I think this week that are really important. And, of course, then they have the 7-on-7 on Friday, which is another opportunity for these coaches to get around prospects and watch them play football, or as close as they can to see them play football one last time this summer, which I'm shocked we're here. Like this is the final week. That snuck up on me for sure.
Yes. Well, June is rolling along, as you all have been following, both here on the YouTube and podcast feeds and also at bluewhiteillustrated.com. So for these final days of camp season, join us at bluewhiteillustrated.com, where it's just $1 for the first week and then build annually from there. You can find that deal at bluewhiteillustrated.com. T. Frank and Ryan will have updates throughout the day. Throughout the rest of the week, Sean Fitz as well from all the latest recruiting news that's happening in and outside of State College.
Yeah.
So be sure to check us out there.
And
all right, I think it's.
Can I just put in another
Yep.
pitch? So today's the 18th. If you sign up now, it'll be to the 25th. But if maybe you're slow and you don't get to it right today, I understand. Like I have like 6 or 7 things that I have to do that I haven't been able to do yet because I was off yesterday. We're wrapping up the camp series, right? And official visits. And that's going to be part of the show is like it's the last official visit weekend. The decisions you want to know about are coming. The players making their choices for the class of 2026. The elite talent is making their decisions, and that's going to start next week. So if you want to know the behind the scenes, what our guys are hearing before it happens, you should subscribe to bluewhiteillustrated.com. But also a great time to remind you, subscribe here to the YouTube channel, because when we do our breaking news commitment videos, you'll be one of the first to know. And you'll be one of the first to get that larger context and conversation that we have here on the YouTube channel. So, whether or not you join us on the site, and then that video becomes kind of like a celebration, like you cross the finish line, you get to have like pop champagne and talk about it, and it's the spectacle of it. Right. The information is at Blue White Illustrated. So make sure you join us either here or on the site, or better yet, both. Why not?
Yes, please do consider doing both of those things as we get ready for the second half of the show, which is our weekly game of buy or sell. So if you have not been playing along with T. Frank and I here over the last couple of weeks, it's a very, very simple setup. We pick a topic. You either buy it because you agree that it's going to happen, or you sell it because you don't think it's going to happen. T. Frank and I have a very scientific process of picking these questions. It is basically typing over each other in a Google Doc at 7 o'clock in the morning. So we're always looking for your topics that you would like to hear us discuss on future shows. So please drop those if you're listening live in the YouTube comments, or if you're listening on replay in the podcast feed comments, or here on the channel as well. We will take your questions so we don't have to type over each other at 7 o'clock in the morning. All right, first one up. Buy or sell on this, T. Frank. Let me pull up the graphic here. Okay, you got it. First one on our buy or sell list. Doesn't matter who Penn State picks as its backup quarterback. So the question is obviously looking at the situation behind Drew Allar, where Jackson Smolik returns from an injury and is trying to take the second-team job from Ethan Grunkmeyer, who had it at the end of last season once Bo Prabula hit the transfer portal and, of course, ultimately ended up at Missouri. Nate Bauer has a story for subscribers at bluewhiteillustrated.com looking at Danny O'Brien's thought on both of those guys as the offseason continues, but I know that backup quarterback conversation comes up often here in the chat, over on the Lions Den message board, wherever fans gather to discuss. And so that leads to the obvious curiosity about who will win that job. And to me, the simple answer here, T. Frank, is does it matter who Penn State picks? No, I'm selling. It does not matter to me. And there's 2 reasons for that. One, both are progressing nicely since they've been to State College. I don't know if either can be Drew Allar. Now, you could make the argument that Penn State's run game may be so talented that it doesn't totally matter who's under center, but those guys are not at the point of replicating Drew Allar. But also, in the world of the college athletics in 2025, I think you'll see both those guys get action this year when it's time for the backup to commit. Now, is the number 2 guy going to get more? Yeah. Could it be closer to an even split than normal? Sure, it could. Or maybe one guy will just completely overtake the other, and it'll be more of a common backup quarterback situation. But curious where you're at on that topic.
So I'm glad you went first, because I wanted to debate I felt like I had a strong case either way for the buy or sell. So you sold this, that it does not matter who is the backup. I'm going to say I'm going to buy, because the quarterback competition for 2026 started in spring football. Sure. And it's going to continue this summer, and it's going to continue this fall. So I do think, as you just alluded to there, are they going to split reps as the QB2? Maybe. And so, like, how they decide to play that, how they decide to keep whoever maybe is truly the third quarterback, engaged in the program and making sure that they want to be there at the end of the season, so they're not down to Beckham Kritza as QB3 in the transfer portal if the team makes the playoffs, which we all expect they should make the playoffs. I think it's absolutely critical to know how this plays out. And to the 2025 season, you're right. It absolutely does not matter who the backup quarterback is. I think while I think both those players are good and will eventually be a quality starter in college football, whether here or elsewhere, it doesn't matter for this year. But it does matter the here or elsewhere. And I think that can be dramatically influenced by how the team handles that backup quarterback situation from August through December.
Right. And you make a really good point about that competition for next year starting now, because barring something completely unforeseen, Drew Allar will be done at Penn State after the 2025 season, and then it's on from there. And it'll be very interesting to see how that shakes out. So you're right. It does establish that pecking order. So it's a fair point to buy there. To me, I just think that we're going to be talking this time next year about who Penn State starter is going to be, because James Franklin's going to design it that way.
Yeah.
But it will be fun. We will be having pretty much the exact same conversation next year, I think.
Can I?
Yeah.
Sorry, finish your thought, and then I wanted to follow up on that particular thought.
Yeah. No, that was it. Just that we're going to be having the same conversation, just not about who's number 2, but who's number 1 at this time next year.
So, 3 years ago, 2 years ago at this point, 2022, when we were doing this dance before, and James Franklin would not name a starting quarterback before the start of the season, right? One of our most watched shorts on YouTube is about that, where here's how it was playing out. Drew Allar was taking all the number 1 reps with the first team that we saw. And, you know, you can say like, oh no, when you weren't here, they were splitting reps with the number 1s. I'm like, yeah, but during a significant portion of practice, Drew Allar's the number 1 quarterback at all times. He was in spring. Yeah. The whole time Drew Allar was the number 1 quarterback. And James Franklin would not publicly, verbally confirm that Drew Allar was going to be the starting quarterback during week 1. And so I put out a sarcastic short of Drew Allar taking all the number 1 handoffs, throwing to all the number 1 receivers. And I said, Drew Allar's totally not the number 1 quarterback. Definitely not. It's gotten more views in the last 3 years than probably all the next 10 shorts that we've had combined. It keeps coming up. Like, people totally miss the context, and they think we're still talking about Drew Allar getting benched 2024, which I find hilarious and also like maybe problematic. I don't know. Like, there should be a shelf life on some of these things where that shouldn't be coming up anymore. But I still see people commenting on it in 2025, like not getting the joke, not getting that it was sarcastic. Like, how could you not get it in the moment or later that was absolutely a joke because of everything else going on and how it played out? But, you know, well, it's the internet, of course not. And 5 years later, 4 years later, 3 years later, whatever it is, you don't even have the context of when it was created. So I think about that quite a bit, and we're going to have to do that again next year.
Yeah. I think you put it best a moment ago when you said that it is the internet, and that is simple as that. All right. Next on our list of show topics here is moving to special teams. And the question now is this: buying or selling second-year Penn State starting place kicker Ryan Barker can be a top 5 kicker in the country. And to make it simple, the metric I'm using here is simply field goal percentage, so made kicks. Okay. Not the perfect metric. There's no perfect metric in my mind for this particular one other than that. I mean, that's the one that everyone's going to go to, right? So Ryan Barker was not a starter, as we all remember, at this time last year or at the start of the 2024 season. He replaced Sanders Zahadak early, though, in September, and ended up being pretty reliable for Penn State. If you take out the one he missed from 50, I can't remember how far it was, 52, 54, something like that, he ended up being in the top 15 last year in field goals made percentage, but he would have been number 6 if you took out that 50-yarder. So based on what you saw last year, everyone, the kicker's an interesting position always because nobody wants to talk about it usually until they screw something up. It's a lot of offensive line similarities there. But you feel comfortable about Penn State's placement kicking game? I guess is probably a better question than whether he's in the top 5.
Yeah, but, let's add some stakes. Yeah, top 5, buy or sell. I'm going to say sell.
Yeah.
because I think that you can't be a top 5 kicker if you're limited to under 50 yards. Because what that is so
Right.
there's 3 criteria, right? Consistency, and accuracy, I guess you can say in a different way.
Yeah.
Range and clutch, right? Those are the 3 things of when the pressure's on, do you have the mental to make sure that you are consistently hitting or if you have a bad game and you need to hit a game winner, can you pull yourself out of the slump and get there? So I would say like he was super consistent. I feel like he has some of that clutchness in him, but if you don't have the range and the offense has to get closer, and I think Penn State's decision-making matrix last year of going for it and being aggressive on 4th down was not just about wanting to be aggressive, but also understanding their kicker's range. And there's a reason he wasn't the starter, and that's part of it. That's if the 2 are close in camp, their accuracy and their overall metrics, and you're going to go with Sanders Sahadak because he's got the howitzer leg, and you're hoping that all those other things, and then suddenly the pressure gets to him and he doesn't have that third element, that clutch gene, you're going to go with the reliable clutch guy, and I'm oversimplifying this. I'm sure there's 1,000 different things, but I don't know anything about kicking. So that's going to be my summation for it. I think that Ryan Barker can have an opportunity to be one of the best. If he's improved his range, then yes, but I don't know that I've ever seen a kicker dramatically improve their kicking range over the years, but I also haven't paid attention, so I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's certainly possible. Yeah, I probably sell here too. And it's not necessarily the best way of phrasing this question. That's why we ask you guys to help us. But also, I just think that, I see him as top 10 kicker, top 5. We'll just have to wait and see if he makes those incremental improvements that we're talking about. Sure, it's not out of the question, but if you were phrasing this question the way I should have phrased it and saying, do you feel good about Penn State's placement kicking game? I'm buying there for sure. I think that we saw enough last year that maybe the range was not always there, but the accuracy and the consistency usually was, and big moments didn't seem to be a problem for him. So, he's young, which is good
the
too.
good night photo after USC, the cojones on that one. Yeah, like I get why you're expressing a little bit of regret in terms of like the phrasing of the question that we both sold on it, because Ryan Barker came in and was great last year. But I do think it's that's important context too. I think that's absolutely important context where if you're going to be a championship team and you want to go as far as possible, all of these small deficiencies may show up at some point, and you have to be aware of them. You have to be prepared for them, and you have to understand them if you're a fan, as opposed to, everything's great and it's going to be an easy path to a championship like on rookie mode. And I refuse to live my life that way, because then you're disillusioned at the end. And I think that even in situations like this, I think it's important to have that conversation too.
Yes, and so it will be interesting to see what improvements he makes coming up here when we get to see him during preseason camp and then during the 2025 season. But I think most importantly, Penn State fans should feel good about where the special teams are at this point. We'll see if they can go even a step further in 2025. All right, time for our question of the day. So, T. Frank, the next topic for buy or sell, which again is our question of the day. I believe this comes from the message board. Maybe not, but you can always leave your question there as well. Will a transfer start for the Penn State defense this year? So, Penn State comes into 2025 with among the most returning starters in the country, but a lot of them are either on special teams or on offense. Some are on defense, but not as many as maybe it's what it's been made out to be nationally. So there's obviously room for a newcomer to earn a starting spot. What are you doing, buying or selling that a transfer will start for the Penn State defense this fall?
It's funny. I'm the one that put this question on the rundown. I don't have an answer. I'm going to sell. I'm going to sell that, because if we look across the opportunities, I don't see an opportunity for a starting position. So linebacker, Amari Campbell, who we talked about earlier, I still would expect Tony Rojas and Dom DeLuca to be starters at linebacker. And then you got defensive tackle with Owen Wafel, defensive end with Anai White. I don't see the D-line producing a starting role, given you've got a lot of guys returning and then some guys that are growing into the position being the starters there. Owen Wafel, I think, can contribute, but I don't think he's going to be a starter. Then you get in the secondary. The one place I would say the saving grace, the saving hope is that nickel safety position. And then it becomes a semantics conversation of, is King Mack a transfer? And I would say that the odds-on bet for me right now is that Zion Tracy is going to get that starting job. I think I've talked about this all offseason of likely versus best case scenario and the range of skills you need to have to play that position and be the starter and the guy that dominates snaps at that nickel safety. I think the signs point towards, even though he was banged up in the spring and wasn't out there, Zion Tracy is going to get more opportunities to start based on just my feeling of where the staff might land. I think the best scenario is that King Mack is the starter, but I'm still going to sell. I'm going to sell based on that.
Yeah, well, my unserious answer is to buy because we didn't say what year the transfer had to come from, and AJ Harris will start. So I will buy based on that premise. But
damn it, technicalities!
To answer the question based on the way it was intended, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, T. Frank. The question really comes down to King Mack and whether he's on the field for the first snap against Nevada. Of course, then we can get into even the semantics of what is a starter in 2025 based on the way they rotate guys.
Yes.
So you could go down any number of rabbit holes here, and it's June 18th, so we have time to. But yeah, I'm going to go with buy. I think King Mack will be out there and play a starter level, but the level of snaps. But you make a great point on Zion Tracy. I think it was your Jim Knowles audio I was listening to a couple weeks ago where he really raved about Zion Tracy despite him not being out on the field for spring ball, a little bit banged up. So certainly Jim Knowles likes what he sees, and if we know anything about Jim Knowles at this point, I'm buying anything he is selling when it comes to player evaluations because he doesn't seem all that interested in giving them to you unless he believes them. So I'm going to buy on his beliefs in Zion Tracy. I think King Mack obviously came back for the opportunity to earn a role, and he's expected to earn that role. So we'll just see how this all plays out come the fall. But yeah, I'll buy. It's a lukewarm buy, obviously, because it really comes down to one guy. But we'll have to wait and see how it all shakes out.
And of course, because that's the question of the day, I want you to reply to the video if you're watching this on replay or in the chat. Buy or sell on that particular question. Do you think a transfer will start for Penn State in 2025? Somebody brought up in the chat, sell for sure unless injuries occur. Injuries can occur, right? And we saw, and lineup changes occur in season when things like that happen. So it's entirely possible that what we're saying right now, by Nevada, there might be some situation that changes and upsets the apple cart. So get your comments in on the video. Leave a comment below about what you think. Buy or sell. Does Penn State have a transfer starting on defense? The reason we talked about defense is, Greg, it's obvious they're going to have a transfer starting on offense.
Right.
There will absolutely be at least one, if not three starters on offense at receiver that are transferred.
Yes. Yeah, that would have been too easy. That would have been no fun. But let's get to one that may be a little, have some a little bit disagreement. Next up on our list, buy or sell. Well, Drew Allar averaged 10 yards per scramble in 2025. Last year, he averaged, I should have it in front of me. I do not, but certainly upped his running game abilities. You may have it in front of you, T. Frank. I don't.
I'm getting it for you in just a second.
Yeah, so I'll just filibuster then. But Drew Allar, the running game was a part of. It's a great show prep by me. Was a part of his.
I'm the one that wrote it, and I didn't
year.
Have it down, so not your fault.
And certainly that was something Andy Kotelnicki wanted, and is something we could see more of this year in year 2 of the Kotelnicki experience in State College.
Yeah.
Also, Drew Allar is, the more he sits in the pocket and finds open receivers down the field, the more he does not need to do that. So What are you doing here? Buying or selling?
Yeah, so the number is 7.5 yards. I had it at the top of my head, but I've been so wrong on facts during this show that I was like, I'm not going to be wrong again about something I wrote earlier this week. Yes, 7.5 yards per scramble. That's the important thing here. Not per designed run, not anything with the run game proper, but these are on scrambles, designed passes where he decides to break the pocket. Let's have some fun. I'm gonna buy this one. Here's why. And this is just so I can talk about the article that I wrote earlier this week, is Andy Kotelnicki. We talked about this actually on the show last week, of Andy Kotelnicki really emphasizing Drew Allar's physical transformation this offseason as the biggest thing that's different between him in January and now when he was asked that. And that's obviously the thing that leaps to mind when you look at somebody, but he's also the person that has a deep understanding of Drew Allar's mental makeup as a quarterback. And I think it signaled that Penn State needs a certain element of Drew Allar and his mobility this upcoming season. But there's a bunch of different reasons why. So I broke down the 3 most likely ones of why Andy Kotelnicki might be hinting at that. And number 2 on that list is his scrambling ability. If you want to read about number 1 and the in-depth conversation about the offense and the option game, you can go read at bluewhiteillustrated.com. But if Drew Allar's more athletic, and we saw that he was a good scrambler last year, he 19 first downs on scrambles, which was top 6 in the country for all quarterbacks. But you can be absolutely devastating to a team and make it so they can't run certain coverages if you reach a certain level of athleticism when you're scrambling. And to me, that number is 10 yards per carry. And I think Allar is capable of doing that from a decision-making standpoint and from a general athletic standpoint. If 7.5 was like the baseline for last year, yeah, I think that if he can break a couple more tackles, be a little more elusive, there's not all that big of a difference when you're out in the open between 7.5, a broken tackle, and now you're averaging 10. And that's like a first down every single time you decide to run. That could be devastating for a defense and open up the passing game generally for the offense.
Yeah, I'm just going to take your word on this one because I just want to rant for a second and sell on the way the NCAA does its stat keeping.
Thank you.
Obviously, in the college ranks, if you are sacked, yes, it goes against the quarterback's rushing total, which to me is just completely obnoxious.
It's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Yep.
Yeah, it always has been. It always will be. So I am selling as hard as I can sell and on how ridiculous that is, and I am buying as hard as I can buy on the idea that they should change that. But they have shown no interest in doing so, so I don't think I'm going to get my wish this year. But certainly I think that's something that should be looked at, and it's also why you have to go look at the advanced stats to
that's where
break
I'm
this
going.
stuff down.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's, to me, that's just ridiculous. Yeah,
they include sacked in the yards for scrambles, so it's yes. It would not be taken off of rushing yards for the team. Now that I'm talking about it out loud, I don't know exactly how it is, but it's a separate category. It's broken out into a separate category in his total rushing yards. So I don't know. So that's why I brought up specifically his scramble yards, because sacks would be counted against that. Yes. So that's the answer. Yes, sacks would be counted against scramble yards.
All right. Well, that was buy or sell for this Wednesday, June 18th edition of BWI Live. T. Frank, we made it 52 minutes on June 18th. I feel pretty good about that. You have any other topics you want to kick around before we get out of here?
Yeah, we just got one bonus mailbag question that we put out the mailbag every week at bluewhiteillustrated.com. Because of the schedule this week, it got a little confusing. It was out on Sunday night instead of Monday, but I wanted to make sure we got to all the questions that we could in the chat or in the message board. And Ear to the Ground had this one. He said, what team on the schedule poses the biggest upset risk outside of Ohio State and Oregon next year? What non-Oregon OSU game do you think is the most concerning? And so I think we haven't talked about this with you, but I think we have answered this question. We have talked about this question previously on the show. So I wanted to get your thoughts on what game do you think is the most intriguing or dangerous spot for Penn State next year?
Okay, so the obvious pick is Iowa because Penn State has to go to Kinnick. It's kind of a weird point of the schedule for Penn State. And you just never know what you're going to run into out there. So that's the obvious pick, no doubt about it. Yep, the chat already is Iowa. I knew that was going to be the case, and with good reason. But it's just a strange place to go. And things just happen there that don't happen other places. Dave says UCLA. UCLA is a trap game. They are an improved team. I have Dave. I'm not sure you're over on the board or not. I have. If it's not, I can briefly recap my opinion on trap games there. I don't believe in trap games. I get the concept. I don't believe in them. But that's a weird trip for Penn State too, no doubt. There's no doubt about it. I am not as bullish though on UCLA improving the way some seem to think they have, at least enough to challenge Penn State. If look, if Drew Allar throws 3 interceptions, or if Nick Singleton fumbles twice, or If Penn State goes out there with 3 of its top defenders, yeah, okay, of course. But I don't think UCLA's made big enough strides. I know they picked up Nico, and I know that, obviously things are, in their mind looking up, and they're going to be better. And I thought they played hard last year. I mean, for everything they had to endure, a 9 a.m. body time kick. I thought they were tough. They didn't quit.
They challenged Penn State. Yeah, they had a good defense.
I thought that was impressive. So it's a fair one to pick. I'm not sure I'm buying it, or I'm not sure they wouldn't be my number one pick. So Iowa is number one. Again, it's the most obvious answer you could have to this question. But don't sleep on Nebraska. I think that might be a feisty Cornhusker team that comes to Penn State late in the year and will be upset minded. I would think by the time they get there, their chances. And you never know, but I would assume by then their path to the college football playoff will probably be pretty much completely eliminated. But that means they'll be upset-minded. And Matt Rule would, I'm sure, love nothing more than to come back to Penn State and win with a Nebraska team that is seemingly taking the steps to be better and making strides kind of similar to what David's talking about with UCLA. So I think if the obvious pick, Iowa. If I wanted to go the non-obvious pick, but probably what would be everyone's number 2, it would be Nebraska. And we'll see. Obviously, that the flip side of that conversation is what's Nebraska going to look like in November, and what's Penn State going to look like in November. And we won't have that answer for some time.
Z-Man has Indiana ? And I don't know their roster well enough yet. It's hard to reload at a place like Indiana. So I think that's a decent beginning of the season. Have your antennas up for that, but we might also see that they can't sustain what they did in a similar way to Illinois. And Illinois wasn't able to sustain the level of success they had with the NFL talent that they had. I do like the comment about UCLA, not necessarily about UCLA. And I'm not trying to what I'm not trying to elocute here, Greg, is trap game. But I do think there are some certain situational factors at play. It is after the whiteout, and it's after Oregon. So like the emotional letdown, and then on the road at what is optimistically a 3:30 kick. That's not going to be a night game. So, Lord, if it's a 9 a.m. kick for the body of a Penn State football player to go out and play UCLA.
No chance. There is no chance. Yeah.
So that would be – I still think like traveling to the West Coast is a part of the conversation. James Franklin probably is more comfortable with this year, but still is not like that. Penn State is acclimatizing to this West Coast road trip. And I think that's going to be – until we see a consistency in that of them being able to handle that, because I think that the beginning of the USC game last year was a mental or physical break on the defensive side where they were not prepared for a USC team that was good, but should not have done and been in that game. Like they were not to that level. They had good parts to that team. They had good elements of it, but I do think that kind of West Coast travel was a part of that. Getting out of that game with a win was important, and UCLA, I'm going to have a similar opinion of for that. I don't know necessarily about the talent level for UCLA, but if you got a quarterback, who is not bad at football, and I don't know if Nico is great at football, but I know he's not bad. Right. So we'll see. Like there are some elements of that game I do think are kind of interesting and worth previewing. Now I feel the pressure. I've got to go in and start doing some film study. I got to go start watching these teams to see who's going to be the biggest threats for Penn State. Here's the problem though. Like, what does Nico Iamalava's film from Tennessee have anything to do with UCLA? And, nothing. Like with all the transfers and like all the things going on, Oregon, I don't know. Like I know what they like to do schematically, but the players involved might change a lot of that. So like a lot of this offseason prep is in modern football is a little bit frustrating, but we'll get it done for you. It's probably especially in July.
Yeah, it's never been, I think, more difficult to put together. So, okay, I think, and we can close out with this, putting together the top 10, at least having the top 10 teams. You may argue about the order. It's fairly doable, maybe even top 15. After that, good luck. To the amount of tracking that needs to be done to figure out, that second tier of teams, not necessarily the ones that are going to compete for a college football playoff spot, but are still top 25 worthy. A lot of changes year over year with those rosters, and it makes it tough to know. It always was tough to know what you were going to see in the late October, November portion of the schedule, and now it makes it almost impossible.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, that's our show for Wednesday, June 18th. For Thomas Frank Carr, I'm Greg Pickle. We will be back next Wednesday. The guys will be back on Thursday for a recruiting show, get you all up to speed ahead of Penn State's final camp weekend of June and really of the year until the visitors return in the fall. And we'll see what else they have to talk about then. But for T. Frank, I'm Greg Pickle. We'll talk to you next time. It's been another edition of BWI Live.